my 2 cents. All right. And this is partly in honor of Martin Luther King Day, which was yesterday. I'm making this video on Tuesday. I want to talk about teaching, learning technology and its interaction with social justice in a kind of pretty indirect way today, but hopefully it'll make sense. So I want to start with, I asked you to make statements about what is learning, teaching, and technology. And I just want to focus on that learning piece. The language we use for things influences how we think about them, or like our paradigms of the world. And often the metaphors we choose for learning have to do with acquiring something. I get something, right? Here's a whole bunch of different metaphors. Epistemological, they're just saying like, these are metaphors that have to do with what knowledge is. So we can be receiving knowledge. Knowledge is a thing we get. The mind is a container that we put knowledge in. But there's also a lot of other ways to think about learning other than just receiving or memorizing or retaining information. So we can look at these construction that learning is putting things together, learning as a player or teacher as a coach, learner as a participant, teaching as persuasion, learning as enlightenment or growth. Those are a lot of different metaphors we can reach for when we talk about learning. This is a great article. I'll put it in Moodle below. 2 metaphors for learning and the dangers of choosing which one, just one. And the 2 metaphors they talk about here are the acquisition metaphor and the participation metaphor. So do we learn by getting things, or do we learn through our participation in something? We learn how to participate in the world versus we get things. Okay. And in this article, they talk about the pros and cons of each and says, look, it's best if we look at this in a balanced way. We don't choose just one or the other. Okay. And it's a great article. I'm going to do one thing. I am going to talk a little bit about knowledge acquisition here, just in relationship to social justice. So, we have this world today where everyone's always looking, we talk about fake news all the time, right? We talk about a post-truth era. If I think of when I was in school, if I was in a history class, a teacher told me things and I memorized them, right? So that was a knowledge acquisition type practice. I was not taught to say, is this true? I was just taught to accept everything that was told to me in school. So what happens when those people go on social media and they see something and they don't know how to evaluate truth? Because in school, they were just always said, just memorize this, this is true. Everything I tell you is true. They don't know how to evaluate that. So what happens is if they see conflicting reports, they just choose whichever best aligns with their feelings, right? And so that becomes a problem, which I think is a problem because we're so focused on this acquisition model of learning that we don't think more about the other acts or participation pieces of what learning is. So there was this scholar, his name is Paulo Freire. He's actually Brazilian, I think. And he talked about 2 types of learning or education and schooling. He talked about a banking model, and that is that acquisition model, that we're going to receive information, we want to memorize it, we need to be able to repeat it back and retain it. And he compared this, and I'm going to turn off my camera here, he compared this to a problem posing curriculum. That's where instead of just giving people information, we're actually inviting them to explore and analyze and question things. So here's a comic that I found about this, a little political commentary here. If we have a teacher that is just telling students everything they need to know, the students just start to accept that and they see reality from whatever they're taught. Okay, so if we think of the structural functions of our country when they talk about systemic racism or structural racism, that goes along with this. We just listen to whatever the teachers or the education system, and I'm not saying it's individuals, it's on a systems level, whatever they're saying, we're taking in. and assuming to be correct instead of questioning it. So Freire presented a different type of education or learning, and others have come after him and tried to clarify it, and they call it critical pedagogy. So in traditional teaching, we're usually focused on classroom management and discipline, how to do something. And in critical pedagogy, we're more emphasized on the human beings and what they need, what their backgrounds are, and their histories. Traditionally, we focus on instrumental dimension of education. That's kind of like, how do we get the test scores we want? Versus a more holistic function of education. Like, what role does education play in our society and in our world? And then, we have neutral and political and unidimensional and multidimensional. These get a little bit controversial. It depends. One thing that I think is that if we assume, I'm not going to go into that. Anyway, I'm going to move on. You can talk to me about it again if you want to know more about my thoughts on that. So there's this critical pedagogy, and then these people came up with this thing called critical digital pedagogy. It says, what does this look like in a digital world, a network society, which we'll talk about in week 2. And this is part of a network society really emphasizes open and networked educational environments. So we're not just focused on the one here and now, or the people in this classroom, where we're networking, we're connecting across a lot of time in people and environments. And this is saying that that technologies, they must be platforms for engaging teachers and students as full agents of their own learning. So instead of technologies being repositories of content, they're saying they want them to be platforms for engaging full agents of their own learning, so that learners are not just, technologies aren't just housing content, they are actually encouraging students and teachers to interact and be agents of their learning and create. There was a lot of really great comments on the discussion boards that talked about this in some way or another. And I just picked one of them, but I could have picked so many. I picked this from Allison on this Kindergarten Create podcast. And she talks about being a lower elementary school teacher. Younger students are put into a box in society's view. So you think of that critical pedagogy, just saying, this is how students are. We're putting them in a box. As the podcast shows, they are also creators, encouraging them to create their own ideas. The teacher gave the students opportunities to share thoughts and responsibilities. Everyone is a learner. That's a piece of critical pedagogy, that we emphasize that the teacher is also a learner with the students. They're not just, or really, they kind of try to dismiss the teacher as being an expert. And then this experience gives them a reflection on what learning new things looks like, and ownership over creation. I love that. I just thought about that a lot. Like, what does it look like to learn, and how can I create something and share it and have an impact? That's what critical digital pedagogy is about. It's about creating and actually starting to have an impact on the world around you, instead of just receiving information all the time. One more quote, and this is because this is a good preview of week 2. John was talking about Kindergartners Create podcasts, and he talked about how this podcast experience affected the teachers and students, but it also made it onto a news article, and it's affecting us in our class. And he said the ability for a class project to snowball into such a meaningful experience across such a wide group of people is such an interesting aspect of the internet. So keep that in mind as we talk about a network society this week, how society is different, how it collapses space and time, and we're able to have such a broad influence through technologies, and learners can too. Phew. All right. Thank you for sticking with me through that. I hope it was interesting, and I look forward to seeing your work in week 2.